All right, well, thank you everyone for making it through. Looks like the weather's turned a little bit, so you have no choice to but.
5 minutes, then it's gone.
Taco's eager. So the last item that we had on the agenda was actually thinking a little bit about curation of the sort of research data versus curation of infrastructure data. This is another one where probably in the AADC, I'm not authoritative in this because we haven't been we haven't been monitoring the data from NOINA in an infrastructure way. But when I guess we're talking about infrastructure, there's what you collect from the scientific sensors, multi-beam weather systems, all of the deployed gear, and then there's information about the ships themselves. For instance, sort of what are the load strengths, what are sort of winch information, which can be useful for improving ship operations, understanding maintenance, and trying to improve engineering design as well. At least that was my interpretation of it. So I guess at this stage, who here does maintain or either does maintain or has an interest in maintaining information for infrastructure purposes? So Alex does. I know that there was another European group that was interested in it. And from my perspective, this is something that we should be interested in. I think that most of us are probably more familiar with the scientific data pipelines. But I guess that a question that I would have for Alex, would this infrastructure information be for public use, or would it be primarily internal to inform the decisions? Or would this be something that would be exposed potentially to universities to do design research or engineering research?
Very good question. Some of it is platform monitoring data that is useful for those operating the physical infrastructure on board the vessel, but it does have overlap with scientific applications.
Okay.
So winch operations is a good example. It is useful for winch operators to be able to see. I mean, there is already the winch has its own control system that has data collection, and we're taking a feed out of that, and we can then put that data into the hands of people who are asleep in their cabin. That's what we want to do. But still, the winch information is useful down the line for people who want to know when things occurred on the vessel. If the question is, where was the CTD deployed from, and nobody recorded it, then the winch will tell you. It will, that data, so it does have scientific applications, as have things like all of the lab management guys who put temperature sensors around the labs. They're doing that for monitoring purposes. You want to know whether your salinometer room is cooking at 40 degrees, and that might screw up your solid. Then you want to know that after the fact. That's all on the science side. If you come to the things that have less overlap, like how much power is going out of the prop shaft, that is a different thing. But they are still scientific applications, or they're crossover ops science, and I'm getting that a lot. One of my observations is from Net Zero, from our AI lab here for route optimization purposes.
And so we're getting a lot of push in this regard to facilitate more operations research, to facilitate better ways of doing things, more cost-effective ways of doing things, less energetically expensive ways of doing things like net zero. And again, that's the operations research aspect of things, but you could also foresee that this information could potentially be turned over to an engineering shipbuilding research program to say, well, sort of what are the stresses? What are the resistances? Can we design icebreakers better, more effectively? Can we run them better? So, it's not just collecting environmental information. The infrastructure itself becomes a research objective. I think that, but to return to my earlier question, I think that people, if you were to describe this to people that you could provide this information, I think there would be a lot of interest. But in the operation space and in the administration space, I also foresee that there would be some reluctance in, sort of public perception or exposure or liability, all of those sort of, they wouldn't want it to get out that, our rooms have been running at 60 degrees and we've been forcing our grad students to slave away, before it was just expected that would happen. So in terms of how would you try and work that administrative wise to understand what could be released and what couldn't be released?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Because there are some things that you'd put out there and nobody would be concerned with them. But like you said, I recalled from Vessel Insight, which is a Kongsberg data logging system, because obviously the main manufacturers realized that data is the new oil.
Mm-hmm.
And so they are all designing data logging systems and putting them onto their clouds for third parties to then mine to get, it's still your data, but they'll provide products on top that will provide value. And the manufacturers of the main control systems, ship control systems, are all doing the same thing. So we take a side feed of Vessel Insight, which gives us about 30 or 40 parameters out of the 10,000 that are internally going through the control systems on board the vessel. But they include things like fuel flow to the main engines. Fuel flows tells you how much fuel we're using. We're an environmental organisation.
Yeah.
What better way to get rid of your vessel and move to autonomy than public knowledge of just how much fuel it takes.
Put the screws to it, and this ties in with what I was talking about before. Where I'll first of all say I'm sure that 99% of the time it would be fine and nobody would have any concerns. It's in that 1% where the lawyers get involved that it becomes a little bit more significant. But I'll come back to the story that I told earlier, which is people released all of this data about the taxi cabs thinking, isn't this such a wonderful thing and we're doing something right for the community? You could also foresee that somebody would decide to reverse engineer things about ship tensile strength and what it was doing, and fuel use, ship operating temperatures, and if there were some sort of catastrophic incident, people would expect to be able to reverse engineer it as well. So I'm not trying to advocate anything. I'm just describing the situation. You might foresee a situation where you say, okay, well, maybe there's an embargo period or some sort of vetting process before we release that information. Maybe that would be the way to go. But yeah, you might get, if there were an incident, then you would probably need to black that out. But at the same time, people would probably say, well, that's understood because we need to work through a particular process. So maybe there would need to be some internal processes to embargo the information, make sure people were comfortable with it, and then have it roll through. But I do think, from my perspective, that it did broaden my experience to think, yes, this infrastructure information could be better used, better incorporated, and would inform better engineering decisions, better design decisions.
I could see that we could release. So I'm unsure that we would release internal engineering data from the ship, especially if there was no clear science request for it outside of internal teams that are working on making the ship more efficient, which is the purpose of what they would be mining that data to do, to find routes, and so on. But I could see that some of the products that might come out of that could fall within the public remit. So one of the things that Vessel insight, and we could do is determine the mode that the vessel is undertaking, whether it is in transit or, you know, so you use data to provide you with events effectively. And that kind of information could well be put into that. So a product, so an information product that comes on top of the data, that could well be made available as part of our event information.
Yeah. And sort of tie it together with those annotations, ship environmental information. I not having been an engineer myself, I would think it would be an interesting, a potentially interesting source of information. And I think you could control which pieces you would expose and which ones you would not, and something. And this would be, you know, similar to endangered species information. Some of it would be available on request, and you would vet who's asking, but could potentially release it.
Then, Alex, do you store all the data permanently? I mean?
Yes.
Because if there is no application, no usage for the data, then it doesn't help in being net zero.
Sorry, there are internal applications for it.
Okay.
So there are internal teams. I mean, and this happened in the past. This isn't a new thing. I mean, obviously, we want to make our operations as a vessel operator as efficient as possible. And the difference now is that we can do it with real-time streamed data at full resolution, rather than, you know, engineering reports that, you know, might just be PDFs or whatever, handwritten reports that people back have to, you know, look at and determine and do something with that information. The difference is that our AI lab can now work on, you know, vast amounts of real-time data and come up with potential efficiencies. But there's a difference between us doing it internally as a vessel operator and making those available to the wider public in the same way that we have a remit to make environmental data available.
Can you get faster, lighter things that deliver the same quality of information in a comparable way? It'll be worth being able to empirically demonstrate that.
You know, if we've got to go to 7 different places, which is the best order to do it, you know, with a complex set of requirements, then solve with lots of data, and we can potentially solve with lots of data
and especially if you can integrate it with real-time forecasting. Like, this is where if you understand the sea ice dynamics and more effective routing, can you get improved fuel efficiency as well?
I don't know whether the science minister was here today. There was a poster downstairs in the reception area that had the current route optimization work, which exactly describes what you've just said, and that's what they're using. And there's loads of companies that are trying to do route optimization. There's a whole
probably burning all kinds of fuel running the computers to do the optimization.
Possibly, but I mean, it's a massive thing.
Yeah.
The global fleet, the commercial fleet going round, obviously, you can save vast amounts of money if you can make it more efficient. The distinct element of what our team are doing is clearly it is bespoke for this particular vessel, but the more generic part is that it's got the sea ice information, and so it is distinctly useful for polar operators, which obviously will potentially get missed off some of the global products.
But you could also foresee that if people had general aspects of ship characteristics such as ship form, ship design, just the hull, nothing sensitive, you could do a fairly large cross comparison of, you know, which ship designs tend to be more efficient, more effective. Take a look at speeds of transit. You know, is it better to move slowly and deliberately, or, you know, gun it when you can? Especially if you see an opportunity to navigate through the sea ice. So this is just a way of saying there are potential uses of information for operations research outside of sort of the dedicated science campaigns. But then you do want to think of, you know, is it just another data type? And while I guess I'm arguing that you might use the same systems, I would also argue that there's probably a greater degree of there will be a greater degree of sensitivity, relating to its release because of its interface with corporate decisions and corporate ways of operating. Thoughts from the floor? So I realize that this is
Kind
probably
of goes against the, I mean, we always say that making the data freely available, fair access, will increase data usage in ways that you could never imagine, and that will always be good.
Mhm. But there are parts of your corporate body that you want to expose, and there are parts of your corporate body which you might not want to expose. So that's,
Naively, you'd like to think if we made all that data available, there'd be good people out there who would take it and come back to us and say, you could operate your ship more effectively.
Mhm.
Here's some free advice for you.
You've probably actually got a lot of those emails in your spam folder already.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
then I also learned once that ship design is for, I won't say a large part, but for a part also fashion. I mean, at times it's fashionable to have this kind of bow or that
Mhm.
design, so that has nothing to do with efficiency or so, it's just that what people like, what people
Mhm.
at the time, so.
And there may be a sort of a fashion aspect to it, but you may start getting into, different modes of operating, different engine capabilities, and, small decisions can lead to big outcomes, especially in the Australian context, we're getting a lot more pressure to conform to net zero expectations. And you sort of think, my goodness, an icebreaker, even if it's hybrid electric diesel, still trying to get that to net zero. What does that mean? So I think that you're going to see a lot more deep soul searching about honest to goodness ways to reduce and become more effective. Because if every dollar that you save will be a dollar that you can put back into your programs, and it will add up. What about, I guess, how does this mean that we would need to start thinking about having operational vocabularies? Do those exist for this sort of information? Does anybody know if NERC would have controlled vocabularies relating to this? I honestly don't know.
Which bits do you mean? Do you mean?
So I guess I'll start with the easy one, like winch strength and tensile
Even
interest.
if they don't, they have the capability to have those added in.
Yeah.
Because they're non-domain specific. So you could add a parameter, you could add a sensor.
We could add them, but is this a domain of an existing domain of theirs? Fair to say we don't know. I guess that's just an open question.
I don't know, I doubt it. If you take their sensor table, it is predominantly marine
Yeah.
sensors, but that's only by history.
Yeah.
By design, it can take any sensor. So if your sensor happens to be a prop motor,
Yeah.
it can take that just the same as anything else, and then you have a term that's in there if you so wish to then annotate that piece of the parameters that come out of there. The force or the power or whatever can easily be added if it's not in there already. The kind of vocabs that aren't possibly there are some of the event type vocabs about transit versus if you want a mode of a vessel, operational mode of a vessel.
It might be interesting opening up the conversation with the BODC about whether they've thought about this kind of operations research component and whether it's something they would be considering capturing.
But are we then as a community, the right community to build such a vocabulary, or should it be the ship design community?
or the engineers. So
Yeah,
this is more in the engineering space, but this is part of the reason why I'm raising this as an issue is that we talked a little bit earlier, you know, about the interface with the engineers and the data people and the need to integrate. While I do think that this may be sort of an engineering issue, people like the IEEE probably wouldn't be thinking in this domain. And it might be, we would certainly be the downstream of this. Because we're talking about maintaining it as a data collection that we would be curating and delivering and providing to other people. So I guess that is a point of, would we take responsibility, or if we say it's not us, who would we be expecting to do it, and who would we be foisting the responsibility on, and would they be receptive to it?
Or it could function as a link in between the UDC and
Yeah.
whatever community we.
Yeah. But I am aware that these conversations don't emerge in and of themselves. We would probably have to initiate that discussion. So that may be a point that we want to capture, that maybe we as a community, I won't say but can reach out to BODC and just ask if they've been in this area. Yeah, Petra.
My understanding is that they would be happy to host the vocabularies, but I think they like the community that to work with those communities, but also to have a champion that takes the responsibility and then also maintains it on a long term, because you know they have so many already that they cannot be experts, and they, so that's always the question of who is then
Who are the experts?
on
Yeah.
a long term maintain that.
And I guess the beneficiaries would be things like, the ultimate beneficiaries would be things like ship design firms or equipment design firms. They would be the ultimate beneficiaries. We would be willing to provide that information. But I don't know who institutionally it would be good to assign as the maintainers of such a vocabulary. Thoughts? I won't ask you to do a show of hands, but do people think that, yeah, it's us, it's definitely us that should be doing that? I'm not getting a strong sense that it should be us. So then I raise the question, who should it be then? Who would we see as taking responsibility?
Give an example of the vocab, the new vocabs you would expect to see. Because there's a question about the scope of existing ones.
Yeah.
And the amount of resource. So let's take sensors as an example.
Mhm.
At the moment, it's mainly marine environmental sensors. The BODC often comes unstuck when people come to them with huge lists of things like cameras, because there's a million and one different cameras.
Mhm.
And then you expand that to any sensor that could exist anywhere.
Mhm.
All of a sudden, it's unmanageable for them to do their work, to put that in. And they may say, "Whoa, scope stops. We're not putting in engine parts of a Boeing 747. We're not doing it."
Yeah.
So they stop there. But for new vocabs, that's a different thing, because the NBC will take care of L22. They've said they will do. So that's a scope thing. But for new vocabs, what vocab can you think of that the community would need to be the overseer of in this space?
So I guess thinking off the top of my head, it would be sort of marine operational data vocab. So I would be thinking of things like winch payout, winch angle, winch speed, winch distance, probably things like frame, stress. Yeah, those would be the things that would immediately come to mind. I'd have to probably go through the rest of them, but it's yeah, a lot of
For that, I'd put that in our scope, and there's already vocabs that would take that.
yeah,
Either semantic sensor tables that would have those characteristic
yep,
pieces in that would just have numbers associated with them.
yep,
Or there would be parameter values, just the same as
okay.
a value from an analytical piece of kit.
No, that's fair. So I guess that something that we would say is that, so we do have the ability to, so which, do you know the designation of the vocabulary that would fit in? Is it a P something or?
So the characteristics of a sensor, the sensor metadata, for want of a better word, that they are W0 vocabs, 0, 1 through 8 or something like that.
Okay.
That's not well used. So this is all sensor ML type work that's come out of sensor ML. But the stuff for the sensors themselves, obviously, like L22 and
Okay.
things like that.
So then this may be something to consider is, can we effectively conform these operational data streams into W in order to get some sort of interoperability with the aim that hypothetically a researcher could bring together this sort of different information to take a look for cross comparisons and efficiencies across different ships in terms of how it's used. I know that there's already things for ship speed and ship navigation and all those sorts of things. This is more sort of the internal engineering components. We may be able to cover it, and in that case, we would get the interoperability and be able to deliver it. Does anybody see any problems with that? Does that sound pretty reasonable?
I think you, not to spoil the fun, but
Yeah, that's okay.
I think you're one step ahead.
Mm-hmm.
First, you have to be sure that there is a need for, because you're now solving a technical problem,
Mm-hmm.
but you're not sure that there is a question. And I think you should, in our case, in this community, we should probably talk to research vessel operators, whether they would be interested in having that kind of information and doing something useful with that, either in future research vessel, icebreaker or non-icebreaker design, or in having ships operated in the most efficient way, being net zero, etc.
Yep.
And if they, because they have to, the ship operators have to actually do that. They should be the champions that we're talking about. They should also provide the funding to actually make it happen. Perhaps in vessels, sensors have to be installed to actually measure things and to get this information in real time from the ship to shore. So if the ship operators think it's useful and in that they should be doing, then we can offer, okay, but here's the technical solution. If you want to do that, and if you want to be interoperable and compare your measurement from your particular ship with other ships, then you need to have to use a vocabulary, and here's BUDC where we can they can build a vocabulary, but we don't know exactly what should be in the vocabulary. So please, research of vessel operators, come up with somebody who has the knowledge, expertise to do that, to fill such a vocabulary. So the first step, I think, would be to
establish that there's a community.
establish a community. Well, the community is there. That's in our case for research vessel. It's those research vessel operators, and they work together in ComNap, in OVER, in I think ISOM still exists. I'm
Mhm.
Pogo, you might ask Pogo.
Mhm.
Uh,
Yep.
So that would be, I think, the first step. And then if they agree, then there are some technical
Mm.
things, but that's more the solutions that we're now discussing than the actual.
To do some groundwork first. And I think that's a fair assessment. I will say I'm quite confident that we would have interest from our Department of the Environment as the ship owner in Australia, and they would say, yes, we do want to have research into how to do things better. I suspect that if you're to talk with the ship designers, they would say, well, if you've got the information, sure, we'd be interested in taking a look at it. If we were to ask them to pay for it, they'd say, yeah, we've got it covered.
Right.
But I think that there probably is a little bit of a case of if we were to get our house in order and deliver some cross-comparable data, I do think you would get people who would be interested in taking a look at it. It's just a case of, do we invest some time and effort on our side, or are we looking for people to definitively say we want it before we set to work? And so, yeah, I do take your point that doing some groundwork to establish necessity in the beginning, or at least interest, would be worthwhile. Other thoughts?
Jonathan, this is Webb. Is it okay if I bring up a few points?
Yeah, please do, Webb. Yep.
So I've really enjoyed this discussion. This has just been absolutely fascinating and parallels a lot of other discussions that I've had on the U.S. side, the conferences and whatnot. And it kind of parallels a theme that I've been kind of trying to champion among the U.S. team for years. That's based on a very simple statement made by an ROV engineer who I worked with back in my days at NOAA. And this was actually one of his comments in a shipboard wiki documenting the shipboard systems. And he said, a research vessel is a complex transform function that turns diesel fuel into data. And it resonated very strongly with me. When we're having these discussions about efficiency, I do think it's worth bringing into the equation. It's like, okay, yes, the vessel is going from A to B, but what is it doing? I think efficiency, when you start to calculate efficiency, you should be looking into, okay, yes, it's going from A to B, but from a scientific gathering standpoint, what is it doing? Because that also needs, I think, to be factored in the equation of, yes, we can burn, less, we can optimize our fuel burn going from A to B at this speed, but it destroys our ADCP data quality, or it destroys our multi-beam quality. So we probably need to take a larger look at that and say, like, okay, well, yes, it might be slightly less fuel efficient, but we're in a stretch of the ocean that it's very expensive to get here. We should be maximizing the systems that we have on board, utilizing those systems to collect as much data as possible as we're here, even if it's a net result in a 5-10% fuel efficiency deficit. So that would be something that I anytime I talk about with vessel operators about how do we improve efficiency, I'm like, well, beyond fuel consumption, how are you utilizing the vessel for its intended purpose? Like, how are you maximizing that usage? And that actually trickles down, and this is less of a data issue, but more of a transferring data into policy, is once you start capturing that information, and if you do have a situation where you are transiting from A to B, but you can't run a system because you don't have the personnel on board, you can use this type of data set on efficiencies in terms of not only like the shipboard efficiencies, diesel fuel consumption, et cetera, but you can say, like, we can't utilize the vessel for its purpose because we don't have that extra tech that we need to do 24-hour operations.
Yeah.
And so I just think that's a very interesting, as we talk about efficiencies, I would be looking at the beyond a ship moving through the water from A to B. I'd be looking at, is that ship being utilized to its maximum efficiency for the purpose that it was built?
Yeah, and in terms of operations research, this is multi-objective optimization. So you're looking to optimize your use of fuel, you're looking to optimize your scientific capability, you're looking to optimize the amount of personnel that you use, and the one that's near and dear to my heart is mapping opportunity as well. And you alluded to it that we may never come back. What's your return frequency? If you're never going to come back, is it worth slowing down in order to get all of your systems syncing together? Or, your other objective is if we need to resupply the stations, that may be non-negotiable, and you say, look, we have a hard time for out for, a month and a half, and that's it.
Yep. I mean, I've sailed on vessels with NOAA. They were very interested in this equation, and they were investing in personnel to make sure that we could run the multi-beam we were going for every ping we could get, but we were also going for getting a ping everywhere there wasn't a previous ping. And so we spent a lot of fuel as we were transiting back and forth between the west coast of the United States and the Hawaii. We burnt a lot of fuel to make sure with each transit we made from Honolulu to San Francisco that we were a swath width off our previous transit line.
Yeah.
That became
And
quite
it's-
substantial.
Yeah, and small
But-
changes can, go ahead.
Yeah, but I mean, but that again was, it's like, yes, we're going to burn a couple thousand gallons more fuel by going several miles to the north before we turn west. But in doing so, we grabbed another swath width of bathymetry data between the west coast of the US and Hawaii. And the Okeanos did that everywhere they went. Every time they went to go plan a transit, there was a coordinated effort between the mapping team and the ship operators so that they understood. It's like, yeah, we know this isn't the shortest point to A to B, and we know it doesn't make sense. You're going to, do a dog leg left for a few dozen miles. But the net result after running that program now for, what's it been, like 15 years, that's a sizable amount of seafloor that was mapped for nearly no cost, just by doing the added, homework before operations and looking at efficiencies and creating dive tracks or cruise tracks that were grabbing another swath width of data.
We had one of our hydrographers do an assessment of, or I should say our acoustic specialist do an assessment of the gains that we get by offsetting, and he had them in terms of Tasmania units, like blocks of Tasmania that you would get out of doing this. And yeah, we were able to get several Tasmanias out of just offsetting every now and again. And there's, small decisions, and you might say, well, we're burning more fuel, but at the same time, you're saving yourself the cost of having to do a dedicated voyage out to do it anyways. So you're gaining that efficiency by saying, look, we don't have to specifically go out to this location. We're getting it in an opportunistic manner in a cost-effective way.
Exactly. Yep. The most efficient way to run the vessel might not be the way that uses the least fuel.
Yeah, and I will say I definitely like your point that you mentioned from that note that we're converting fuel into information and scientific opportunity and all of these things.
So, okay.
Additional thoughts?
It's a nice slogan, from diesel to data.
What was that?
From diesel to data.
Yes, yeah, that has a nice ring to it.
I actually gave out T-shirts that said that back at a conference in 2014. A lot of people got a kick out of them. So if you see a black T-shirt with a logo, with a diesel logo, an arrow, and ones and zeros, that was me. There's a couple dozen of those floating around.
Well, they're a hot commodity item. Look out for them on eBay. Is there anything else that people would want to add on this? I realize it's probably sort of an unusual or maybe new concept for people, but it's something to think about. How would we deal with it? What complexities does it introduce? And what opportunities does it provide? All quiet? Okay, so I'll return to my challenge that I also provided at the end of the last session, which is we've gone through all of these different items. Are there other things that we haven't raised or other important things that we need to think about? Or is it the case that we've got it all solved? See, all that we needed were the 2 days of the Polar Vessel Data Workshop. We're totally good now. We have everything that we need through time. So are there challenges that still remain or things that you'd like to highlight? No, nothing's coming to mind? Yeah, Masaki, it's okay?
I can't follow perfectly. But I will be currently planning to compile all the data to one repository or to database.
So
By using cloud systems. Compile all the Antarctic ocean data could be compiled to one server or cloud server.
So at least from IDW, I think that the conventionalist thinking is that it's probably not going to be feasible to put everything onto one server. So if you take a look at the collections of National Antarctic Data Centers, we're not, I won't speak for the UK, but you're probably not going to allow us to take all of your information and park them in Australia, and we'll take EMODNet's information and Italy's information and put them on one server. I don't think any, from on one standpoint, countries won't give, and on the other standpoint, it's a tremendous resource burden. So in terms of centralizing, it's probably not the case, but federating is much more possible. And so you've touched on the grand question, the Holy Grail question, which is how do we bring all of this information together?
You could centralize if you pay someone like AWS.
I'm sure AWS would love it, so would Microsoft. But this does raise questions about data sovereignty. You know, do we just hand all of our information to Microsoft and call it a day? I don't think, at least from the Australian context, that they would be willing to do that. So to return to your question, you know, how do we federate information in an effective way? And so we've already touched on one aspect of it, which is trying to get good vocabularies to establish interoperability. Webb did also touch on, you know, if we get good APIs and services, that also helps. It doesn't have to be one size fits all. We can standardize at the API in there. Since I have the floor, you gave it to me. So one problem that I've been thinking about that's been coming up is the notion of geo-distributed computing. So they have a paradigm these days that you can have data in S3 services as a data lake. And so the classic paradigm has been, well, I'm going to download files. These days with the cloud, you can shuttle little pieces of data around, but sometimes it's not effective to be moving the data. Sometimes it's more effective to take a look at, we have compute and data together, compute and data together, compute and data together. Maybe we have compute and data in the UK, compute and data in Australia, and compute and data off in Finland. How do you arrange it such that you have the minimal transfer of data and the maximum amount of compute available? So that's actually a notion of geo-distributed computing, and computer scientists are now starting to work on it in terms of how can we optimize so that the least amount of data is moved, the shortest amount of distance, and enabling the maximum amount of compute. Another concept which came up at IDW last week, which I also thought was a very interesting paradigm, is that people are now starting to say, sometimes you want to have deep control over your data, so you don't want the data to move at all. And so instead, what people do is they move the algorithms to the data. So somebody would transfer a vetted algorithm, which would be run on a local computer, and then it would return the result out. the data doesn't move, it stays fully controlled. Now, from my perspective, this introduces additional problems in that how do you know that it's a trusted algorithm? How do you avoid Alex's problem of, well, it becomes really popular and thousands of people start hammering your server in order to make it happen? How do you trust the results? But at least in the privacy, that they were discussing this in the context of medical information, because they didn't want medical information leaving their data repositories. Instead, they would much rather have the algorithm come. They could apply it in a closed black box manner and then return the results out in a controlled way. So the reason that I bring this up is that the problem of federation always runs into, you have individual groups who will remain in control of their own particular space. It's non-negotiable, but we still need to bring it together. How do you do that in an effective way so that you're moving the least amount of information possible? So it's a complex problem. As I said, that's the holy grail problem that you've raised, Masaki. So it's a good one. So I don't have the answer, but I just wanted to raise the concept that computer scientists are beginning to think about geo-distributed computing.
Just want to react also. Maybe I missed it. I was not here yesterday, so I hope I'm not saying something that you said already yesterday. But one part is also documenting which data is available where, from whom it has been collected. And this part, there are several efforts that are ongoing, ready to like map the data system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Was that an okay response?
It's okay for to Jonathan's answer, but my additional related concerns, question is in my information, SUS has become a member of the network member of the World Data Systems. World. So, when ocean data be at one repository or data center, the other way of the network routing systems. So the center should be should be the reliable database repository system should be holding. So like a license of a quaternion seal. So AAD and but also as a member of data system, so you have already get that quaternion seal. So in that meaning, when provided all over the world community, so it's better to provide by the core set, etc.
So to have some sort of endorsed quality centers that the information would be coming from, like the Core Trust Seal centers?
Yes, the data,
Sorry.
could be compiled in one center. The center should be reliable serviced. As its certification such as quaternion seal. Should be better.
So sort of a more of a, so correct me if I'm mistaken. So are we looking for a sort of a more centralized, certified distribution center for this collection of polar vessel data? Is that correct or incorrect?
Yeah, all the vessel data. I mean, but this will be discussed among us. SUS or Southern Ocean, I'm not sure.
Oh, so is it an area?
Members, I'm not sure about that.
So is the question, there's the SUS observing system, collect observing variable information in SUS, and we're talking about polar vessels here. So we do have a representative from SUS here. I do think that the objective is to have the information flow through to SUS But ultimately, Petra, Seuss is by and large a portal to all of these different collections. That's correct. So Seuss does provide overarching capability, but the federated systems that we build will help Seuss to pull that information together. Yep. Frank?
Short time ago, I listened to a talk from somebody from EarthPro in US, which is a seismological survey, and he was actually talking about the data handling. And so they have, observatories all over the world, and they have defined query type so that if somebody put the query in one observatory, they would automatically go in query, all the other observatories for like earthquake data. I mean, that could be a model, like something to do if somebody says, okay, has looking for sea surface temperature in whatever that region, instead of just, you go to Australian portal and looks there, and then it would also send the same query to the other portals. I mean, there would be not computing or whatever, but just the first step that you have, like all the different data holder allows the same kind of query type to pass through.
So,
First step.
so something that would be good to, would be to have some way of doing a tree search of all of the different systems, however that would be executed, but being able to come to a point and drill down to find the different components. Is that fair?
Something like that.
Yeah. So, I mean, Seuss may provide some sort of capability. But I think another thing to think about is that the classic paradigm has been to tree down to metadata. I think we're now starting to get into a world where people are looking to tree down and aggregate the actual data itself. It's becoming much more expected to be able to pull all of that together. And I know that's been our big challenge, is to move out of, yes, we have the different metadata components and we can search across the metadata components, but how can we get down to data interoperability?
But I think that's also different. I mean, it's a like for one Arctic data set, we have so many different data types that wouldn't be optional. But if you talk just about sensor data from ships, there's like standard underway data you can query. I mean, ship track, sea surface temperature, I don't know, weather data that are like constant data streams. I mean, just pretty narrow for those.
So I guess would it be worth trying to think about a unified ship underway data product? Would that be something?
Maybe, I mean, from practical standpoint, you can just pick three and start organizing something that people can do.
Yep.
That said, of course, I don't think R2R is set up to do that.
No. Does Seuss have some sort of capability to do that, to deliver a unified sort of ship underway table?
Well, I will show tomorrow some pioneering work on that, in that direction. So, there are options and capabilities to do that, but some further development would be needed. But it's also whether it's something that the community would like. And if you remember at the last Seuss DMSC meeting that we had in Hobart, we have discussed or tried to identify all the underway data from various countries and where the resources are from as a starting point that could then feed into SeussMap. So that idea was coming into.
So it's formulating.
Could you repeat that? Because are you talking about Poladex or?
No, it has nothing to do with Poladex. It's not about logistics. It's about the data from underway, from various operators from ships. It's not about logistics where are free cabins for people to participate. It's
So it's a unified view over ship underway, a selection of ship underway data?
So it would be showing from various cruises, from various institutes, the underway tracks, and then also the data that could
In real time.
it would not be in a real time, it would be near real time or delayed mode.
It would probably be as soon as it's made available through services.
Depends also on where the data is. In some cases, it might be rather easy to do that via near real time, but
Because there are several programs which already do that for meteorological data, for sea surface data. Collect the data from all research vessels, and you could actually make a product of that.
So,
About the OSHUD program, and got the meteorological one. It's Sean Smith in Florida.
so it might be worth us reviewing the various the available underway platforms, seeing the degree of alignment that we have with what we're thinking. And I think it'll probably be a win-win situation, because if we're able to deliver what Zeus is looking for, we can also deliver it to these other channels. And so I think that it might be an opportunity to kill several birds with one stone if we make sure that we're all on the same wavelength. Okay.
I have one question too.
Yeah, please.
The data of vessel tracking, data compiled by Zeus should be forwarded to the ComNav database.
So supplying the track information to comment.
I want to confirm the connection of the data sharing between the Zeus compiled data to the ComNav.
well, the ComNav, I think is feeding
ComNav.
into Polardex, but that's more on the logistics side rather than feeding the data that are being collected on the way.
For the utilization of the search and rescue, for example.
Yeah. So I have to confess, I don't know the details of how ComNav operates, but I can speak for a local instance. The AAD provides their vessel track information directly to ComNav. And I think that in some cases, I don't know, but ComNav may be getting information from the AIS systems rather than from other, so they may not be needing to go through Zeus. I think that the vessel AIS is feeding directly to ComNav, I think. I can't give you the official word.
Yeah, I'm also not sure what exactly ComNav collects apart from the tracks. Maybe it is.
Yeah, definitely not data, because I know that the ComNav asset tracker is actually maintained by the AADC. And so it's just a simple Node JavaScript interface, and there's no data associated with it, just the ship tracks. But I think what Petra is talking about is, in addition to the ship tracks, being able to pull a unified view of the data. But we can talk about what's needed for ComNav and search and rescue. Other things that people think would be good initiatives or things that they would like to see? No? Feel like the well is starting to run dry a little bit, but I'll tell you what, I'll give you one more chance to raise issues. You have it be going, gone. But what I will say is, I think that this has been good from my perspective to get people on the same page, talk through some issues, to talk through ideas, and, you know, have this sort of discussion. This is what I was hoping for. Dave has been assiduously taking notes in the corner there. I see him, but even if you haven't been taking notes, we have video recording. So thank you very much, Alex. And we will try and put this together into at least some sort of written form, run some sort of written synthesis so that people have it and will be able to refer back to it. And even if we've taken different pieces, I hope that everybody at least has something that they were able to take from this that is about thinking, that you have some ideas to take back and maybe grow with them. So Polar Data Forum definitely is not over. It's going to be continuing tomorrow, but with more structured presentations. So at the very least, you won't have to listen to me talking again and again and again and again. But you'll have other ideas too, except for Taco. He's got to sit through SCADM. So, but for my part, I just want to say thank you very much for your participation. Thank you very much for your time. And thank you very much for making this a worthwhile 2 days of thinking through polar vessel data. So with that, thank you again. And you're free to go as you like, but contact us if you have any questions. Okay?
Thank you to those that are still online, but we'll now stop recording in our management. We've got a couple still left. Webb's still here.